With community infections subsiding, we find out what experts are predicting for Singapore in the coming weeks. Phases 2 and 3 of the new Cross Island MRT line could have 11 stations in the west. Thinking of investing in property? We'll be looking at some big trends to watch for in 2022. You're watching The Big Story. I'm Olivia Quay. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. Following the completion of whole genome sequencing, 2 imported COVID-19 cases who were positive for the Omicron variant in preliminary tests have been confirmed to be indeed Omicron infections. The Health Ministry reporting yesterday that both cases are fully vaccinated and have mild symptoms of cough and a scratchy throat. They were isolated upon arrival in Singapore on December the 1st and had not interacted in the community. Meanwhile, 4 deaths and 662 new cases were confirmed yesterday. The cases comprising 638 in the community, 13 from the migrant worker dorms and 11 imported. Associate Professor Alex Cook, Vice Dean of Research at the Sawswee Hock School of Public Health, joins me now. Welcome back to the show, Prof. So, also as said yesterday, the ICU utilization rate was at 48%, while the number of new cases has been below 1,000 for 4 straight days. MOH also said yesterday that the current wave of Delta cases is subsiding. So all optimistic signs, fingers crossed. But what could happen if these trends continue?
Well, what the last month or so has really shown us is that if we have vaccine differentiated measures and we've got 5-person gatherings and we've got most people working from home and some quarantine isolation, but fairly light touch, then under those conditions, the Delta variant cannot sustain itself once about 40% of the population have either been infected or had a booster shot, which is what we think the situation is just now. So as long as it's still the Delta variant, which is spreading in the community, then we shouldn't have to tighten restrictions any further than they are at present. And in fact, I think that we can probably be bolder with the relaxation of restrictions, since the move from 2-person to 5-person gatherings has not unduly affected the overall epidemic picture. Now, it probably will be, that as we relax more measures, the virus transmissibility will start to edge up again. It may well edge up above 1. And if that happens, infections will start to grow again. But we're currently still at a level far below that in which the health system is going to get threatened. So even if or when that happens, it doesn't mean that we need to tighten up measures again. We can ride out any second wave as long as it's still the Delta variant, which is the dominant virus here. In other words, the situation is very favorable for reopening further as it stands.
You brought up the infection growth rate earlier, which has been below 1 for the 24th day in a row. Well, MOH said yesterday that as the present wave subsides and infection numbers start to stabilize, Singapore can expect the ratio to trend towards 1. Prof, help us make sense of that. If things stabilize, why would the week-on-week infection growth ratio return to 1?
Okay, so if the numbers are low and stable, then the weekly infection growth rate should be equal to 1. You can see why if you think of, imagine that we've passed through the wave, we've not reopened any further, we've got 10 cases a day. If we've got 10 cases a day this week and we've got 10 cases a day next week, then that means we're in a stable situation. The epidemic's not growing or shrinking. The growth rate is 1 at that point, because each case this week is matched with 1 case the following week. But that situation, although it looks bad because the growth, when you look at the growth rate alone, actually is a better situation than we're in at present, where the growth rate is below 1, but the numbers of cases are in the hundreds. And that's because the absolute number of infections is smaller. And more generally, the typical shape of an epidemic is like a bell curve. The growth rate is high when it's on the way up, it's above 1. When it reaches the peak of the epidemic, at that point, the growth rate is equal to 1 because the case is 1 week before the peak. 1 week after the peak is the same on average. But as we pass that peak and we start to come down again, then that's when the growth rate is going below 1. But at some point, the growth rate is going to get shallower and shallower as the epidemic flattens off. And that's why the growth rate doesn't really matter so much when you get towards the end, because the cases are so small that it doesn't matter if the growth rate has now gone back to 1, i.e. at that replacement level.
Right. Well, Prof, currently the predominant strain in Singapore is the Delta variant. But I want to focus now on Omicron. 2 preliminarily positive imported cases have been confirmed as Omicron infections. Early reports suggest Omicron is more transmissible but less severe. What are your projections? Should that creep into the community? How many Omicron cases a day should we expect at first?
Well, the early period of any community transmission, that's the hardest to predict stage because there's so much luck involved. Whether we miss that first case in entry and he or she goes off to infect people in the community, or whether that the first few cases are involved in any super spreading, like they go to a mall, they go to football matches. So we might get lucky in that we don't have Omicron in the community for a while, or we might be unlucky. It might already be here in the community and spreading, and we just missed it so far. Either way, it will eventually reach our shores in the community. The million-dollar question is really what happens after it becomes established. So as you noted, it seems really clear when you look at the data from South Africa that the cases have really shot up over the last month. It's almost actually surpassed the first epidemic wave that they had in about half the time. And yet, you look at the South African data, the deaths remain very low. They barely moved since Omicron emerged. And so they're far lower than what it was at previous waves at the same point of those waves. Now, the Minister of Health in England has likewise claimed that of all the cases that they've been finding of Omicron, none of them so far have needed to be hospitalized. So it seems that in the UK too, it's spreading quite well, despite the fact that in the UK, they've got fairly high immunity from previous infections and their vaccine coverage rate is not that far below ours. So if it is indeed much more transmissible than the Delta variant, but it's not increasing the risk of hospitalization, then that means that when it reaches our community, we might expect for a few things to happen. One, it would probably displace the Delta variant. It would potentially lead to a large wave of infections. But if these infections are quite mild, then there's no reason why that would necessitate us reimposing strict measures again. And that's why we're looking very carefully at all of the reports internationally about the severity of the Omicron variant, because that's going to be the key to understanding our prospects over the months ahead.
Thank you so much for those insights. Associate Professor Alex Cook from NUS's Salisbury Hawk School of Public Health. In other news, MOH will stop issuing daily press releases on COVID-19 stats starting today as, quote, the current wave of Delta infections subsides. However, the public can still access the information on the ministry's website, including on the number of cases, hospital capacity and vaccination progress. Now, several experts agreeing with this decision, saying the information provided daily doesn't mean much at this stage of the pandemic when Singapore is transitioning to endemicity. And MRT system map seen by the Straits Times shows what may be 11 new stations for the next 2 phases of the Cross Island line. They include 4 interchanges expected to be in King Albert Park, Clementi, Jurong Pier and Gul Circle. The remaining 7 stations on the western leg of the line were not named. Now, the map was recently put up online as part of a Land Transport Authority virtual exhibition. Starting today, you can send in your suggestions for Budget 2022. The government would like the public's views on how families, workers and businesses can thrive in the post-COVID-19 world. Submit your ideas through the Singapore Budget website, Feedback Unit Reach and the People's Association. Overseas, the US will not be sending government officials to next year's Winter Olympics in Beijing because of concerns about China's human rights record. While US athletes can still compete and will have the government's full support, this latest move could further widen the rift in an already strained bilateral relationship. China previously said it will retaliate in the event of a boycott. House prices are a bit of an obsession for Singaporeans. Where are the latest $1 million HDB flats located, and how much did that new super penthouse sell for? Well, in our new Invest segment on The Big Story, today we are discussing property trends to watch out for in 2022. Christine Sun, Senior Vice President for Research and Analytics at Orange Tea and Thai, has contributed this piece to the Straits Times on how the market will perform next year and what to look out for. Well, Christine joins me now. Welcome to The Big Story, Christine. So, a warning yesterday from the Monetary Authority of Singapore about rising mortgage debt ahead of possible interest rate rises. How will that impact the market next year? And do you also think it will discourage people from buying property?
Well, I don't really think that this will discourage many people from buying properties right now, because currently many of the buyers are actually buying either for their own stay or for long-term investment. So what we are seeing is that for speculative buying activities is also very low due to the presence of the seller stamp duty. But of course, that said, I think that authorities will keep a very close watch on the market, especially to ensure homeowners continue to be prudent in their property purchase and they do not overstretch their finances. What we are seeing is that although there are already levers out there, for example, like the TDSR or MSR, to ensure homeowners do not over leverage, but there could still be some pockets of buyers who may be overstretching their finances. So these could be families who have sold their flats recently and they bought maybe 2 private properties, or others who have taken up a maximum loan without giving much buffer. So these are the people that perhaps the authorities are more aware of. And of course, but if you are talking about genuine buyers who can afford, and those people who are buying luxury properties where their finances may not be too affected, so these people will likely continue to buy properties next year, because what we are seeing is that supply will likely get more limited. And many of these people, let's say example like those HDB upgraders who have sold their units recently, they probably will still continue to buy because they need a replacement home.
Right. So on that note, Christine, thousands of HDB upgraders buying condos this year. Is that likely to continue next year, you think?
Yes, I think the trend may continue next year, because this year, what we are seeing is that many of these homeowners have sold their flats to capitalize on the fast rising resale flat prices, and they are actually looking for replacement homes. So what we have observed is that many of these HDB upgraders, they are buying condominiums in the suburban or city fringe areas, which are relatively more affordable. For next year, what we are seeing is that there may be more HDB flats reaching MOP. And if there are no property curbs and HDB flat prices continue to rise, we may expect more of these HDB upgraders to continue to sell their flats, and then they will upgrade to condominiums. And what we have also observed is that many of these flat owners this year, they were able to sell their flats above 700,000, and some were even able to sell their flats for more than $1 million. So in that sense, it puts them in a better position to upgrade to a private property.
Another trend to possibly watch out for next year, Christine, what's the outlook for the rental market? Do you see demand picking up in the next few months?
Yes, I think if we are barring any new developments from the Omicron variant, or border controls are not being tightened extensively, then I think rental demand is poised to bounce back stronger next year because of the opening of international borders. And of course, we have established a lot of these vaccinated travel lanes with many countries. So with that, we are expecting more foreign expats, business partners, and even students to return. And all these people will prop up the rental demand for the overall market. And of course, if the opening continues, employment may start to pick up in certain sectors, for example, like hospitality, mines, tourism. And with that, we may see more EP holders coming in. And these people may help to prop up rental demand for the HDB and mass market segments. So what we are expecting is that rents have been rising over the past year. And because of the tight supply of completed homes, because we know that there's been delays in terms of construction. So we estimate that rents may continue to rise next year, maybe even at a faster pace of between 8 and 11% because of the higher demand and smaller supply. And of course, we also anticipate that leasing volume may also rise by maybe 3 to 4% to around 95,000 to about 100,000 units.
Christine, I want to get your opinion on one more thing before I let you go. The collective sale market, which has been a little quiet in recent years. Do you expect any major en-bloc activity in 2022?
Yes, I think the en bloc market could also be another segment that we'll be looking at closely, because we are expecting a moderate return of interest next year, because many developers are actually very keen to replenish their land bank. Although we may not see that kind of en bloc frenzy that we experienced in 2017 or 2018, but there is certainly a stirring of activities that we've seen in recent months. So if we look at the news articles recently, there are already a few major en bloc sales that have taken place recently. For example, like Thompson View Condominium, Peace Center, Thiam Siew Avenue, Flynn Park, Wharton Estate Condominium, and so on. So you can see that the pickup in all these successful en bloc activities may indicate for us that there are still many land staff developers who are on the lookout for good land sites to show up their land banks. So many of these developers have been paring down their stock, especially over the past 2 years, because of the good take-up for new homes. So well located and especially those attractively priced developments may see higher chance of en bloc success next year.
Well, thank you so much for those insights, Christine Sun there,
Yeah.
Senior Vice President for Research and Analytics at Orange Tea and Thai. For more property trends to watch out for in 2022, including some major upcoming project launches, you'll find Christine's article at this website below. Visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel for more videos. Subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay. See you tomorrow on The Big Story.